Hello and welcome to Taskmaster Talks. I am JP John Paz from the Two Man Power Trip of Wrestling, and of course, the star of the show, the host of the show, the former WCW and ECW World Tag Team Champion, one of the greatest minds and bookers ever in the history of professional wrestling. He is the Games Master, the Taskmaster, the devil himself, Kevin Sullivan. Kevin, how are you doing today?
I'm doing fine, John. How are you, my friend?
Not too bad, not too bad. It's pretty nice weather, I gotta say, here in Jersey. In the morning, it's like 50, and then in the afternoon, it's like 65. It's like kind of perfect right now. I can't complain at all about that.
Yeah, we're 70 degrees. I'll show you the sun. And we're 70 degrees today, so
Uh,
can't beat that.
looks awesome out there.
Can't beat that.
Yeah, you can't beat that. I love it. So today on the show definitely is going to be an interesting one because this one has been always talked about as a huge show, but I've had a bunch of people, a ton of requests. Last week was probably the most ever with the Dungeon of Doom request, but this week I had a ton of requests for Havoc 98. And I know your buddy and my buddy Larry is loving this show. He loves Halloween Havoc 98. So when I just say Havoc 98, what do you immediately think of? Is it positive, negative? Like what comes to your mind?
Well, I listen to some of the stuff on YouTube, and it seems to me that people got a lot of stuff figured out that maybe have never been in the back of a dressing room. And this is no knock. You know, you got to realize at this time how political everything was. And I don't think it was ever this political in the history of wrestling where you had to be, and Kevin Nash was the booker at the time. He had to be very cautious of how many times you used the guy because this was the first time in my lifetime that I knew guys had X amount of dates. And you had to be, and some guys had creative control, some guys had creative input. So, you know, everything looks easier from the outside sometimes uh, than it looks easier than it was. And I know that Kevin has taken some heat over things, and I've told you about the Dungeon of Doom. Not the Dungeon of Doom, the Finger Poke of Doom.
Hmm.
Kevin was a great soldier, and he's kept it quiet forever. Uh, Kevin did, I thought, a remarkable job under the restraints he had. And I have nothing but the utmost respect for Kevin Nash. And I think he did, in my opinion, he did a very good job. There were things that I didn't agree with that he was forced to do. But other than that, he did a pretty amazing job for the first time slipping in. It shows you how much of a student Kevin was because stepping into that job of running WCW at that time was very difficult. People forget we were doing 3 hours of Nitro, 2 hours of Thunder, and that's 5 hours of TV, and you're burning guys up pretty quickly. So, and you're under the demand of getting ratings because back in the day on a Monday, Tuesday, we lived and died to get to the ratings, you know what I mean? And then
Yep.
if they were down, you had to readjust. And if they were up, you had to figure out how to continue something that was in a positive because back then we were even getting the ratings. Mike Graham was the guy that did that. We knew what the ratings were minute by minute, which is pretty remarkable back in the day.
Hmm.
Yeah, but I'm looking forward. I think it was successful because this was Kevin's really first. I know it's his first Halloween Havoc, which was a huge show for us. So I think he did a pretty good job.
When does Kevin actually take over the book and you become his co-booker or like associate booker or part of the team of bookers?
I think Kevin took it over. I'm gonna say in the summer, either May or June. Yeah.
It's interesting because you were being, you were hot at this point, I mean, as the booker, hot hand.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like you're Jordan against the Trailblazers in the playoffs. You got the hot hand, keep shooting. You know what I mean? It's like, well, why the switch to Nash?
Well, at that time too, is I took 3 months off, and they had you kind of had a little committee going, and I think Eric did the right thing. He put Kevin in that position, and when I came back, Kevin asked me if I would mind helping him, and I said absolutely not. First of all, I was once Kevin's tag team partner, and like I said, I've been very close to Kevin since he's been in the business. And I think Kevin, a lot of people don't understand how smart Kevin was. Obviously, he was one of the greatest businessmen of all times in our business. And I think Kevin wanted to spread his wings. He wanted to see if his ideas could work. And basically, they did.
With those 3 months, was this you were burnt out? You wanted a vacation? How come you left for 3 months?
Yeah, I left for 3 months because I've been, I don't know if it was 70, 80 hours a week at the, basically booking, but when you got off, you got phone calls, you had to field everything. And it was to a point where I didn't think I was being creative enough because I was handling all these ancillary calls and ideas and bombarded. And I think I needed a rest. I mean, one of the things that I think that's the most important, one of the most important things in life is know your weaknesses rather than your strengths. And I mean, I was up, you know, to my ass in alligators at the time, and I'm glad that Eric came to me and I came to Eric, and he said, "Hey, you need some time?" I said, "Yeah, I do." And
Hmm.
uh, I was the one that suggested Kevin, and Eric said, "Well, that's who I was thinking about too." So we both were on the same page. And
Was he
Kevin had a
pushing?
lot. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, was he pushing for it? I know you're saying he had a lot of respect in the locker room and stuff, but was he himself pushing to be the booker?
I don't think so. I don't think so. But he was the right choice at the right time. He had a lot of respect in the locker room. You got to realize too that he understood the parameters he was in with somebody else's creative control,
Hmm.
and he tried to keep the boat afloat in that situation where he knew with one guy there was no idea that Kevin could run by that it would be set in stone. It had to be okayed. So Kevin was good at that too.
And when you came back and you're doing your role, how influential are you on what we're seeing on TV? Are you kind of just are you being like we were talking about with JJ Dillon? Are you just kind of connecting the dots and making sure everything's okay, or are you kind of a bigger picture kind of guy?
Well, I wasn't. JJ was so influential, and Kevin really leaned on JJ for the same way I did. JJ would go put things under a microscope and say, "Oh, here's something you guys missed. Here's
Hmm.
something that, like JJ said about when he booked with Dusty. Oh, you put that down, and we get the same match on Thunder." And he would do it really diplomatically. He said, "You got the same match on Thunder. Are you working a return?" And well, no, we weren't thinking about it. We just wrote it down because you're under a huge amount of pressure.
Yeah.
And because of JJ's doing that, Kevin had a system where he had Nitro on one side, Thunder on the other side, and it alleviated a lot of mistakes. So again, we had JJ a few weeks ago, and the thing was, JJ was so instrumental on keeping bad mistakes from happening and making you look like an idiot. And you know, 5 hours of TV, you think, well, anybody can do 5 hours of TV. Try it. Just put down a piece of. One time, I'll tell you a story. Rick had alienated the production people so bad, and it wasn't Rick's fault. Rick's a perfectionist. And when I took over, I decided I'd bring some of them in. So, so I wouldn't get camera shots missed because Rick had some camera shot missed, and I don't know if it was happen chance or they did it on purpose. Because Rick could be, tough to work with because he is a
Hmm.
perfectionist. So after a while, they start bombarding me. Why are you doing this? Why are you doing that? I put down a piece of paper to everybody that was in the room, and I said, I'll be back in an hour and a half. Let me see what you got. I came back an hour and a half later, and there wasn't one thing written down. So uh, Kevin didn't have to do that. I think Kevin felt comfortable that I wasn't there to tip the boat. I was there to help him, and I was gladly there to help him because, like I said, Kevin's a very dear friend of mine, and we go back a long way. And I wanted him to be successful because I wanted this thing to work. And I think most of the guys that have been around for a while understand if anything goes down and you're part of that team, you're going to be associated with it going down too. It isn't just going to be you. There's Kevin. There's going to be fingers pointed at everybody that's on that team, whether it was me, Mike Graham, JJ. Mike Graham was part of the committee there too with Kevin because Kevin really respected Mike. He respected his finishes at the time. Except for Dusty, there was not a better finish man in the business than Mike Graham. And again, Kevin had a great working relationship with all the top guys, and the younger guys respected Kevin because he gave them nods and pushed for them, and pushed also, which was the most important thing, from their money. Kevin, I've heard some things about Nash is just for himself. Kevin pushed for guys that I didn't even know about. I knew about some to get extra money because they were working so hard. So, Kevin didn't have to do that in the position that he was in, but he felt it was right. And I mean, my hats are off to him for doing that.
Now, as far as the show Halloween Havoc 1998, this is the 10th edition of Halloween Havoc, the pay per view.
Wow.
Of course, WCW kind of hot right here. So it's going to come from the MGM Grand in Las Vegas, Nevada. 11,000 people in attendance, 500,000 pay per view buys. Pretty successful, right? I mean, great gate here and a really
Yeah.
good showing as far as pay per view buys.
And John, I may be wrong, but isn't this the third year in a row we came from Vegas?
Let me see, 96, yes, 97, yes. Yeah, yep. It'd be 3 years in a
So,
row at this point, yep.
and going into Vegas is really hard to draw. You know what I mean? They've seen everything. They're not there usually to see wrestling. This goes to show you how hot wrestling was at the time. I mean, they would go back in the history of boxing. The big fights were either in Madison Square Garden or in Vegas.
Mhm,
And
yep.
so, I mean, this was a huge. How much was the gate again? 3.
11,000 people. I'll try to find out the actual how much money it was, but 11,000 people were in attendance. It's gotta be a pretty substantial gate.
Yeah, so even we'll say if it was 40 bucks a ticket average,
Mhm.
you did over $400,000. That's a lot of money in today's markets.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Just crazy though, the pay-per-view buys as well. 500 about
yeah,
500,000 was the estimate. I mean, that's pretty huge, as far as, they say any pay-per-view, but WCW especially huge.
right, right.
So
Yeah,
really here,
I was going to say you got to realize 500,000 buys. What were they at the time? $30.
usually, I think in 90, I think it was 29.99 usually. I know eventually it would go to 34.99 and then it would eventually go to 39.99. But I think 98, I want to say the average is probably about 30 bucks.
Okay, so you're talking a lot of money there, right? Close to
Yeah.
$15 million.
You're
Am I right?
talking a ton. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
So you got 500,000. Let's just figure this out because I am terrible with math.
That
Yeah, you
is
got 15 million. Yep, 15 million. Yep.
pretty good at math. So, yeah.
Yeah. I had to just double check, but yeah, 15 million. It's just crazy because it just shows you WCW is so high at this point. WWF's high at this point. Wrestling was nuts
Yeah.
in '98. It's just crazy because WWF is doing very well this time too with Steve Austin.
I'll tell you a funny story. At this time, right before the pay per view, I lived in the Keys and I would fly to Miami and I'd drive home from Miami. And one time I pulled over in a mall. Can you believe I went to a mall? I mean, now they're non existent. And I
Yep.
went by a sporting goods store and they had racks of t shirts, whether it was Austin, NWO or Hogan, maybe The Rock. I mean, I couldn't believe. And back in those days, when you go by the high school in the Keys and kids are coming out of school, I'd say 1 out of 8 had a T-shirt of some kind of wrestler. It was crazy.
The amount of popularity and T-shirts and stuff was crazy all over the place because where we went to school, so many kids had wrestling shirts. Wrestling was quote unquote cool again in that era when it was a little bit shunned before. So that was one of the eras where wrestling was not only back but back in the mainstream and back everywhere in a big way.
I got a question to ask you, John.
Hmm.
What do you were living it and you had a T-shirt on? What was the driving force, do you think, that made wrestling cool again?
Oh man, to me and like my friends and ours, like when Hogan turned heel and Hall and Nash were like the ultimate cool guys. That was it for us. When Sting turned into the Crow, that was like another side of us. It's like the Batman Joker kind of dynamic. Like
Right.
Joker's awesome, but I love Batman. He's so cool, so dark, but Joker's so cool. Like it's one of those things. So even Sting added to it. He was awesome as the Crow Sting. Then Goldberg, it's just like one thing after another. It's like, okay, this Steve Austin too. Throw if you want to throw him in the hat, The Rock, all these guys, cool characters, kick ass, believable, but there was a sense of reality in there. There was a sense of like, not only are they your heroes, but it's like, I want to be this guy. I want to emulate this guy. Yeah. So we're all doing the catchphrases. We all got the shirts. We got the hats and, we had all the posters all over the walls. It like became an obsession because we wanted to be those guys. They were so damn cool.
Right, and that's where I thought you'd say. Those were the times when you saw the NWO. You knew if you were a kid, you wanted to have a beer with them. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Because you knew
Yep.
potential, and they made no bones about it. I mean, the unique thing about the NWO, and it was Nash and Hall, and I always put the kid in there because people forget how instrumental he was. If you go to DX and NWO, the only connection there is the kid. He was in
Yep.
both, and you knew that what you were seeing was real, meaning their personalities were them. It wasn't that they're reading off a script. They were coming up with this themselves, and they were really cool. And everybody, like you said, wanted to be them. And they were the most over heels and most over baby faces at the same time,
Yep.
which is
No doubt about it.
yeah, that which to me was the strangest dynamics of the whole thing. How do you have a heel that's so over and a baby face that's so over? I mean, back in what you said about Sting, that was Scott Hall's idea to make him the Crow. So I'm sure Scott gave that to Kevin and Sting, and you know they only were heels when it was against like the Horsemen or Sting or maybe even Luger. But when they were wrestling anybody else, they were just stone cold baby faces. So they were drawing on both ends of the coin. So that's pretty phenomenal to me.
Yeah, don't really see too many heels selling the lead and merchandise, right? I mean, that usually doesn't happen.
I heard a staggering statistic that when they went to the Tokyo Dome for the first time, the NWO, they had bootlegging stuff and they were selling NWO jackets and T-shirts and every uh, paraphernalia you could think of that they drew over $500,000. They sold $500,000 worth
Holy,
of stuff. I think they had like a 65 or 70,000 people house. They were
wow.
out all over the world.
Yep. Yeah, globally, I think it's the most popular wrestling shirt of all time, as far as the NWO.
I'll tell you something. I saw a thing on Dennis Rodman the other day on YouTube. It was a
Hmm.
clip of Dennis Rodman on a sports show, and it was saying he was five-time defensive player and MVP and part of the dream team and all this. And at the end, it said founding member of the NWO. I couldn't believe it.
That's how popular the NWO. That's awesome.
Yeah,
Very cool.
yeah, yeah.
That is awesome. Now, we're going to get into the actual pay per view here from Las Vegas. The first matchup, and there's a great promo here from Jericho. So, Chris Jericho defeats Raven, WCW TV title match. Jericho is just so funny here and just so sarcastic. He's not calling him Raven, he's calling him Raisin, like very childishly. And then he says, "You're a loser," and he keeps saying loser and stuff. So, it's one of those things like very heel like, but not likable heel. It's like this guy is an asshole. Right. I mean,
Right,
the point of Jericho here is he's going to be like the annoying heel, right?
right. And, you know, Chris Jericho was money from the day he came into the business. And, you know, he's going against the guy that to me has been overlooked and underappreciated. Raven was a very, very smart guy. You know, he's got an IQ off the charts. And if you looked at who should have been the heel, it should have been Raven, you know, that dark,
Hmm.
brooding cat, you know, nevermore. And here's Jericho taking that right away from him and making it a cool match by being an annoying heel, you know, which you don't see anymore today. You know, you don't see annoying heels, and he played it to the hilt, Jericho.
Does he at this point? I know now everything is scripted and the guys go out to the ring. They got to memorize stuff. Jericho and most of the guys in WCW, they're cutting their own material, their own stuff.
Nobody, nobody ever gave talkers like Jericho or Raven or Nash or Hall or Hogan a script. If it was some of the younger guys, maybe you gave them some bullet points, you know, because they're brand new to interviews. So maybe you said, hey, you got to hit this, you got to hit this. But they were let to be the character. And I think that's what's lost in wrestling today is, and I think they're trying to get away from it. I know AEW seems to be getting away from it. And I think Vince is starting to get away from it. You can't, how, you know, Terry Funk told me a story. The last time he went up to WWE, they gave him a script, and he gave the script back to the guy and said, I've been doing Terry Funk my whole life. I know how to do it. You
Right.
know what I mean? I think that seems to be the problem is a character is, in my mind, developed from the talent. If you allow them to go out and wrestle and you're not giving them a script, why should you give them a script to tell them what to talk about? They're smart enough to, you know, they're not donkeys. They're smart enough to know what their character is and what their character would say. If they need a bullet point to say, oh, and don't forget, we got the pay per view coming up and plug the pay per view, of course, you tell them that. But I think you're looking at the heyday of guys that really were character driven, which drew money.
And Raven at this point too was you're right. He was such a great talker and great character, but Jericho is such a at this point an enormous great heel, kind of coming up. Maybe he stagnated a little bit with the TV title, but he was so good at what he was doing, and he just came off of that Bill Goldberg almost feud where they almost were feuding, and he kept calling him Greenberg and stuff. I mean, he was so annoying. He had Goldberg fooled, right?
Oh yeah, he had Goldberg beside himself. I mean, I remember this, you know, and you got to realize Bill had been in the business a very short time, and he started out on top drawing money, and he kind of took some of what people said in the interview seriously. I mean, we could go back to, you know, when he put his hand through the window, right? cut his hand. And he didn't like what Nash and Hall said in the ring, you know. And Bill kind of, he got so deep in his character, he thought, well, they're shooting on me. And who knows who was talking to him, too, you know what I mean?
Yep, he's got somebody in his ear for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah.
Next matchup, Wrath defeats Meng. About 4 or 5 minute match, short match. Why put this on the pay per view? Was this necessary? Because this was unadvertised. And we didn't know that this was going to happen.
I think it was that, if I remember correctly, Kevin saw something in Brian Clark, and a lot of us did, and he said the guy should be on the pay per view, and we don't have two bulls fighting. And it was like, okay, we came off of Jericho, and this is why I said I think Nash did a good job. We came off of Jericho and Raven to a real stiff, snug match. It did its purpose, and I believe it was probably about 6, 7 minutes. Am I right?
Let's see, 7 minutes. Yeah.
Okay. So, it served its purpose and made Brian feel that something was going to happen for him.
With that match and doing unadvertised matches, WWE did that a lot. Was that like a time filler kind of thing, or is that just trying
Oh,
to get guys on more guys in the pay per view?
no, it was a little bit more guys in the pay per view, but it was something like, okay, I paid to see this, but they didn't announce this one. And they were doing this way back when I remember they had Hawk appear back in like 90 out of nowhere. And then they'd have a Legends match back in the day. I mean, they had Terry Funk and uh, Tully Blanchard wrestled back in about 90. So people were getting, a bonus, you know what I mean? They
Yeah,
felt
and
they were getting more
that
for their money.
yep, and that Funk Blanchard match is great. Funk gets signed back to WCW at that point, and Tully almost did. I don't know what happened, but it didn't quite work out for Tully. But that's a great match.
Yeah,
The next matchup is Disco Inferno defeats Juventud Guerrera, the very underrated Disco. What do you think about Disco?
I think Disco at this time was a perfect fit. He was comic relief without too much comedy. He was a very solid performer. As you probably, I mean, as I remember that match, it was very, very solid. And the thing about Disco, he did a lot of wrestling. He chopped meat, but he did mostly wrestling, and he could work with anybody. Like, not anybody could go out and work with Hoovy because Hoovy's a high flyer and all that. And if I remember the match correctly, they ended up the finish, if I remember correctly, was a lot of big spots and kickouts, and then I believe Disco beat him with either a suplex or something solid, you know. So I always thought Disco never got the credit he deserved.
What do you think about Hoovy Juice, Juventud?
Oh, I loved Hoovy. I mean, the matches he had with Ray, the series of matches he had with Ray Mysterio was worth whatever they paid him just to have those matches. They were fabulous, if you remember them, John.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
awesome
yeah,
chemistry.
yeah.
Did you see the kind of personality in Juventud or not at this point? Because a little bit later on, he starts really exuding personality. He calls himself the Juice, and he really kind of opens up. Did you see at this point, or not really until he takes the mask off and kind of goes heel?
When he first came in, he was very quiet. He was a very young boy. I don't think he could have been over 18 years old. He was, that's pretty intimidating when you're 18. And, back in the day, the guys were a lot of giants in WCW, you know what I mean?
Hmm.
And he was very, very easy to do business with. I especially liked Uvi because the other thing was there was in that pecking order. Conan was the heavyweight, Ray was the cruiserweight, and everybody fell underneath them. And Hoovy knew his position, which is very hard to do when you're young. And there was never a problem with Hoovy. And I thought he worked so hard that he was going to make it. And I'm glad he did because he was so easy to get along with and he was so talented.
And I think Disco, going back to him, is so underrated. Such a great worker, great psychology too. If you listen to him talk today, I mean, he breaks down stuff, and people are shocked that it's Disco Inferno. That he's that smart to the business. But that's him. It was just a character he played. He actually, Glenn Gilberti, the man, is really smart to the business.
Yes, he is. And I mean, like I said, he was at that time, he stood out because everything else was really, like you said, uh, believable and uh, hard hitting. And then you have Glenn coming out and does the dance all the way down. If you look at the audiences back in the day, they were doing the dance with them. But when the bell rang, he was all business. He'd throw a few dances in there, but that was to pop the people. But his work was very solid. As I said earlier, I don't think people gave him credit for how good a performer he was. And time is sometimes on your side, and sometimes it's against you. If he had appeared maybe 15 years later, he would have been a huge star, because his performance in the ring, there was no holes,
Now
and
the
he looked good too. He looked like a wrestler.
Yeah, now that's another thing. Now, if he was wrestling nowadays, he'd be probably one of the bigger guys too. He's
Right,
not big
right,
for them, but for now.
right, absolutely. And you think, well, if it was now, he probably would have had a different type haircut and probably gotten rid of the disco ball. You know what I mean? And
Mhm.
not probably, he would have got rid of the disco ball, and he could have drawn money in today's day with anybody, and he probably still could.
The next matchup, Alex Wright defeats Fit Finlay. About a 5-minute match. Another match that's kind of just like not really advertised, kind of thrown in there. What do you think about Alex Wright? I think so underrated. He was so damn good, and he was so young when he got to WCW. I think he was 8. He debuted in '94, and he was 18. So it's like, holy crap! So he's about 22 here. He's still young as hell. But man, I feel like Alex Wright was definitely underrated. Surprised that he got the win over Finlay, but underrated for sure.
Yeah, he's a second generation wrestler. His father was an English wrestler, uh, and his father was solid, and you could see, he started in Europe. He started in Germany. His father was an English guy that moved to Germany, and that's when Germany was a big territory. And after they wrestled in basically tournaments over there, like from the summer till end of October, and then those guys would go to England, France, all over Europe. So he was very good, and you hit it on the head. He was a very young boy, you know what I mean? And he was very good. And then you put him against Finley, and Terry Funk has told me the top 5 workers he's ever worked with, Finley's on the list.
Wow, high praise. Didn't realize Funk ever said that. Very high praise.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Fit is a fabulous performer. He's solid. He never got his due that he should have. He drew nothing but huge money in Europe. He was another English guy that moved to Germany and wrestled all in Europe. He drew nothing but money, and when he came to the States, one of the things he might have had going against him was, I don't know if the accent had something to do with it on the interviews, where there was a little disconnect, but nobody gave you a more solid match than Finlay.
Fit is awesome. Definitely kind of underrated. Somehow underrated for sure. But
Yeah,
I love that Funk is saying top five worker. I love that.
yeah, yeah. I mean,
Alex,
he showed. I don't like to talk about, you know, God bless Vader, but he showed Vader who was boss a couple of times. Finlay's really, really a tough guy.
in the ring, Vader, or outside of the ring in a fight?
Vader. Vader tried to get cute on him, and then in the dressing room.
Was it like a full blown Paul Orndorff incident, or just
Uh,
minor?
Fit put him in his place in the ring, and then Vader kind of blew up, and Fit stepped up to him, and that was it. That was
Legitimate tough guy.
he's very, very tough. Very, very tough.
And that was probably the CWA days in
Yeah.
Germany.
When Vader was he was world champion, I believe, in 4 different places, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
In Mexico, in Germany, in Japan, and some place in the States too, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah,
Yep. Exactly. Yep.
yeah.
He was awesome. Had quite a run. As far as Finlay and Alex Wright and like the place on the card, was Alex Wright ever kind of destined for a push, or was he kind of stuck with that gimmick and couldn't break out of the dancing thing? And that theme song is maybe he needed something to break out of it. Was he ever destined for a bigger push?
Later on, he became Berlin, but I think he got, sometimes you get saddled with a gimmick. And the thing was, he was for the younger girls. He was for an audience that we wanted to come. We were looking like the luchadors. I brought the luchadors in because I knew the explosion of Hispanics in our country, and they were an audience that wasn't really taken seriously until I looked at it, because I remember when I think it was AAA came to Chicago while we were running, right? And they drew sellouts, and they went to San Antonio and drew sellouts. I said, we're really missing the boat here. So everybody that we cultivated and brought in had a slot for a specially designed audience. And Alex was for the young girls. Yeah.
The next match is Billy Kidman. He's going to defeat Disco Inferno for the Cruiserweight Championship. So Disco wrestled earlier to become the number one contender. Then he loses, excuse me, in the actual championship match to Billy Kidman. As far as that was a kind of funny thing with Disco too. He's got to lose weight. He's got to make the weight because he's technically not a cruiserweight. So, he remember those skits where he was like working out, losing weight, running, trying to make weight. That's very funny. Who came up with that? That's a great idea too. That was very funny.
I'm going, sometimes I can't remember exactly, but I'm going to say he went to Nash, and him and Nash were very close. And I think Kevin and him, it was probably Glenn's idea, because as you said earlier, he's a real creative guy. So I'm sure he went to Kevin and said, hey, I got an idea. And at this time, when things running smooth, it makes guys think, and they don't want to be left out. And it's a good, harmonious thing to say, "Oh, that's a great idea. Let's do it." Because sooner or later, even if a guy's got 10 ideas and one's brilliant, you've won. You know.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. And it was so funny too because the psychology of it makes sense. He would be a little bit tired because he was trying to lose so much weight. So when he got out to the ring, right? I mean,
Yeah, 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 yeah.
really, I mean, really, really well done.
And I'm going to say the commentary must have said something. Well, this is the second time out. He's been trying to lose
Hmm.
weight, and
Yep.
he's big, so it gave him a little bit of an out too. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. So Kidman gets the win here. What were your thoughts on Kidman? I always felt like, man, this guy, there's something about him that I like. He's such a star, like in the making. Great wrestler, great worker, not great on promos. What's your thoughts on Billy Kidman?
Same thing. I think what made it hurt Billy was the flock, where Raven, the spotlight was on Raven,
Hmm.
and Raven did all the talking. If I look back, I would say maybe, you know, you had to make Raven the guy because it was his flock. And Raven had pretty pretty carte blanche to do what he wanted because he was so creative. But if you look back at Billy, maybe we should have had Billy talking more because I think you hit it on the head. And you got to remember, this is probably the best group of interviewers ever in the history of the business in one place.
Yep.
So if you weren't, if you didn't have your super A game, you weren't going to be, given a lot of time to talk.
So I kind of skipped over this, didn't mean to, but Perry Saturn defeats Lodi in about 4 minutes, another short match. Basically, the story is Lodi and the flock, or the heels. Saturn is breaking away from the flock. I mean, that's kind of the story here. What's like your thought that Saturn, out of those guys, he had some potential. He had some star power to him.
Yeah, I think, the thing was, besides Raven, Perry was the star in the flock. No disrespect to anybody, but the match in the making was Raven against Perry because you knew they were going to have
Yep.
a super match and you knew they could have a great program. And Perry was so serious that it went, it attached well with Raven's work and it also attached well with Raven and Emmett's interviews. Because, uh, Raven is kind of be the guy that was telling Perry what to do, and Perry had been a ranger and all that, so it was like he snapped out of the mind control and he was going to go on his own. So I think, I would say that Raven put most of this together and he did with Perry, and they did a hell of a job.
Yeah, for sure. And the flock, obviously, they're not like the NWO, but they're a lower tier heel stable, but very effective and very good. And the crowd was always into their matches. If you go back and look, they were very into the flock.
Because they all could work. Lodi is another guy that doesn't get the credit he deserves. He's a fabulous worker. To this day, he's a fabulous worker. And he looks unbelievable. So, I mean, that's a thing, too, that's kind of maybe a little missing in the business. Lodi looked very, very good in the ring. The blonde hair, the great body, and he could move. And he could wrestle anybody. He could wrestle a cruiserweight or a super heavyweight. He was very, very good.
Next up is for the WCW World Tag Team Championship. Rick Steiner and his partner Buff Bagwell defeat the Giant and Scott Steiner. Really, Rick wins this one by himself because Bagwell ends up turning on him and really almost costing Scotty Steiner and the Giant the match. But what's kind of the thought process here? Rick is going to be like Superman kind of and defeat all the odds so he can get that one-on-one match with Scott later on in the show that he's been clamoring for months.
Yeah, I think so. I've never been a big fan of brother against brother, but at this time, I started to change my mind because in the back they were so polar opposites. Do you know what I mean? And people could buy that. You know what I mean? Here's Rick, who's like the wrestler of the people, and Scotty looks at the people that he's above them because at that period of time, nobody in the wrestling business looked anything like Scott Steiner.
Right.
And then Rick was, the working man's. He was the late '90s Dusty Rhodes, the working man. You know what I mean? And
Yep.
people could see that there could be family problems. So that's when I started to change my mind that, hey, this will draw money. And I think that Kevin wanted to separate Scott from Rick too and let them both go on their separate ways. So I think it was good.
What did you think about Buff kind of obviously, he hurt his neck at one point. They're teasing that he's going to return and be a baby face, and then he turns heel again. Did you think he could have been a strong baby face, or he was good where he was at kind of like that upper mid card heel?
I think Buff Bagwell is terrific. I mean, I used to go out when we were doing TVs, I would, when Kevin was in charge, I would go out and listen to the pops, and Buff Bagwell would get a huge pop. He was very colorful, except for Scott Steiner. I don't think anybody looked as good as Buff. And Buff's work was solid until he broke his neck. And I'm not taking anything away from his work then, but he learned to work smarter. And Buff was a real asset. And I think that somewhere down the line, I missed it, or Kevin missed it, or WWE missed it, but everybody missed it. I think that Buff could have been a huge single star. Or you could have put him in a tag team and they would have been a great tag team because Buff was the kind of worker that could adapt to anything. And he could be a baby face or a heel, which makes him that much more important.
I feel like Buff, and I know Russo has said this before, and I know Bischoff said it too. Like he had so much charisma and he had such a great look. It was one of those things where he was missing something, but you can't quite put your finger on it because he was kind of like not your perfect wrestler, but like he had the look, he had the ability, he could work, he could talk. There was something missing. I don't know if it was the backstage craziness or maybe his personality, but something he just missing something that prevented him from being a top guy.
I think what maybe it was he was surrounded again, like I said, he was surrounded by the, he was a reserve right fielder behind Babe Ruth. You know what I'm saying?
Hmm.
We had the best talent at the time, the best talkers at the time, the biggest guys at the time. But I think it, if I look at it, it wasn't Buff's fault. It was us not not producing him the way he should have been produced. We should have been able, but again, you're doing 5 hours of TV, and you can only give a guy so much time in your thought process. Now, whatever Buff needed, he could have given. It was our fault, and probably starts with me because I was there earlier. I brought Buff in. I I take it on my shoulders that I didn't see how to get Buff over the way I should have gotten him over.
So really in this match, Buff is gonna try to interfere. It doesn't quite work. So Rick Steiner literally looks like Superman because he beats off Buff, beats Scotty, and beats the Giant, and wins the tag team titles basically by himself. So he's a one man champion, which leads to him defeating Scotty in a somewhat shorter singles match. I think Scott was just returning from injury. I know he had been injured for a few months there, or they were definitely hobbled. So it's about a 5 minute match or so, but then Rick wins again. I mean, was this designed to give Rick a big monster push here? Because he's beaten the NWO, Scotty, the Giant, and Buff by himself.
The other thing was, and this was Kevin's idea, it was very smart. It gave WCW a heartbeat. Like you said, he beat three NWO members, and Kevin was very, very aware that it was starting to tilt to the NWO this way. Not only, I said they were the best heels and best baby faces. It started to tilt that they were heading to the direction of just being baby faces. So he took the working guy, the guy that put the time in, that took the effort, who was an amateur wrestler, made it believable, and gave WCW that heartbeat. Oh, maybe they can be beat.
Hmm.
And he did it with the right guy, that's for sure.
Do you think that Rick and Scott should have had a not let's say better, but maybe a longer singles feud or a longer singles match or a big match leading to a culmination? Because I know Scott was injured and it doesn't really ever really lead to a big, huge blow off one on one match. Like, what do you think kind of happened there?
Well, John, if I can recall, and I'm pretty good at recalling, I think Scott had a few nagging injuries, like you said. He just came back from being hurt, and I'm pretty sure, as you said, the match was short. Was it about 7 or 8 minutes, 9 minutes at the most? with all these
It's
people. What? Sorry, John. John.
yeah. So it was kind of a shorter match for sure. With Scotty and Rick, it seemed like Scott was destined for the main event and not Rick. Do you think that they both could have been destined for main event pushes?
Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, neither one of them ever failed in the position they were at. Let's go way back to the Varsity Club. Rick was the one that the people turned babyface because he got that character over so well. We didn't turn him babyface. I told you the story a couple of weeks ago. I went to Dusty and I said, "The people are turning him. We can't keep him heel much longer." And he said, "I know, I know." Uh, and uh, and Scott, I mean, his freaks and his call out. Everybody in America that was a man was pissed off at him because they knew he was having a time of his life. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
So
Yeah, he definitely destined for the main event. Just his look, his ability, everything about Steiner says main event. And I love Rick too. Rick's one of my favorites. So the next match is one match that is a little weird in nature. So Scott Hall defeats Kevin Nash by countout. It's about a 15-minute match. To me, I don't like them feuding. I didn't like the feud. I know it was all about Scott's substance abuse and how he was drunk, and Nash was trying to be the good friend, and Hall pretends he's drunk to start off the match, and then Nash is distracted. Hall isn't drunk, and Hall beats the hell out of him. Really, Nash should have won. He beats the hell out of Hall, but leaves him laying, almost like making a point, like I could have beat you. You're my buddy. I don't want to beat you. Get your act together. They count him out. Scott Hall gets the win kind of by default by count out. So what's kind of your thought on that feud?
uh, I think they were trying to bring some reality into because the dirt sheets were you know kind of being hard, and I understand it was true to life on Scott, and I think they tried to do a piece to the people, and I think I didn't happen to think you know they were so close, and they were the members of the NWO. I personally didn't like it. That doesn't mean it was wrong, uh, but it just didn't look right to me in my head when I saw them against one another. But I understand what Kevin was trying to do. He was trying to bring reality to it, but the finish was the right way to do it. That he didn't want to beat his partner, and I think they kind of try to get to the point where, okay, we're going to go buy this. But I'm with you. I never liked that NWO members against one another. The founding fathers, anyway.
Yeah. I for whatever reason, maybe it was because I was a fan of both guys. I remember my buddies too couldn't get into that feud. We're like, I hate that Hall and Nash are feuding. We didn't buy it. We didn't
Yeah,
like it.
yeah, and I think that's what most people didn't buy that the two coolest guys on the planet, are fighting one another. You know what I mean? They wouldn't fight
Yep.
over anything. I didn't like it either.
Yep. Next matchup, I mean, this is such a star-studded, huge card. It's like ridiculous if you think about it. First of all, Steiner versus Steiner, kind of an afterthought. Hall and Nash was a big, highly anticipated match. That's not even close to the co-main event, and neither is this match, which is insane. So for the United States Championship, Bret Hart defeats Sting by knockout. Another match that goes about 15 minutes. Man, that could be a main event of any card anywhere ever. Bret versus Sting. Kind of a little bit of a letdown, though, the match itself. It was pretty good, but you almost expect it to be great with those two guys.
Yeah, and if I can recall, I think Sting had shoulder problems at this time, and I think sometimes you can in your mind think it's going to be the match of the century, but an injury will play into it, and I think they got the most out of what they could do with Sting being injured. And I agree with
Yeah,
you, Joe. I think it could be a main event anywhere in the world.
It's just to me, it's like, oh man, it's almost a letdown. Sting definitely was injured at that point. Brett in WCW at times was great, but then at other times, like, man, he doesn't quite fit in WCW, or maybe he should be main eventing, not for the U.S. title. Do you think that he was positioned like well enough as far as Brett, especially coming off of Montreal and the Montreal Screwjob?
No, I don't think he was positioned right. I mean, he was the biggest. That was the biggest thing in wrestling at that time, and I think you know, and there could have been outside influences, John,
Yes.
and I've always thought that there could have been some magic finger saying he's not going to go that far. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So I'm not sure. But that was the hottest thing. It would have been easy to do it.
Now, Hogan and him didn't always get along. Is this possibility Hogan was in Bischoff's ear and maybe Hogan's in somebody else's ear saying, let's not give this guy a big push?
I like to plead the Fifth Amendment. But I don't know. I don't know, but God, I mean, they spent a lot of money, and Brett was a huge star. He came off the biggest, whether it was a work or shoot, doesn't matter. It was the biggest thing, and he came to WCW, and I don't know if we got the most we could have out of Brett.
Now, the next match is literally the main event of WrestleMania 6. Could be the main event anywhere in the world. This is the match everybody was talking about. 8 years in the making, this huge rematch. Hollywood Hulk Hogan versus the Ultimate Warrior, aka the Warrior. Hogan gets to win another match that goes about 15 minutes. The thing is about the lead up. I and everyone else thought this was the main event of the show. How come this isn't going on last?
I have no idea. I have no idea. I think, if I remember well, this was one of those things where they're in negotiations until they decide what to do, and then they decide, let's put this on now so nobody changes their mind.
Interesting thing about this match is that since the show is running so late and everything is getting pushed so late and every match is kind of not long, but there's a couple matches there that go a little bit longer. The card, you think on pay-per-view, especially me at home when I was watching, you think Hogan, the way it's designed, let's just say I think it starts at 7, so the match goes on at 9:30, and would end around 10 with music and intros and everything. You would think that's the pay-per-view main event, just the way it was designed on pay-per-view. Was this just a mistake going on backstage with production that everything was running long?
But no, it wasn't production's fault. It was the guys not going home in time. You have a run sheet and you go from you start at, we'll say the show's 3 hours, and you go down, you start at 3 hours and deduct, and you've given such numbers, you know, this guy gets 6 minutes, then entrances, and you deduct, and you know how much time you should have left. But it's very hard to get guys to go home at the right time, and then you're cutting time, and you're adding time, and especially, when you get to a Hogan Warrior match, you're letting them do the time they need. So you're getting into a time problem, and it always was a big problem.
Who was supposed to be controlling the time? Is that like Nash as the booker? Is J.J.
No,
Dillon? Who's in
no,
charge of that?
Jody Hamilton. But you can't hold Jody's feet to the fire, because if you tell a guy he's got 6 minutes and he goes 10, there's nothing you can do. And you're talking to the referee, send them home, send them home. And you can see sometimes the referee shaking his head. I've told him, but he ain't going home. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Is there panic with Bischoff or anybody backstage? Like, hello, the pay-per-view.
John, every pay per view's panic from the moment you get there, before the matches start. It's a panic situation. It's who isn't in the building yet. Have the agents got with the guys? How much time? How's time? John, can you hold on 1 minute?
Yeah, absolutely. So as we're talking about the Halloween Havoc 98 with Hulk Hogan and Warrior. What I'm talking about here is how the show is basically going along. Everything is going along. Like I just said, a couple of matches go 15 minutes, keep going and going. Obviously, there's 12 really matches on the card, and Hogan and Warrior is match number 11. So as you're going along and you're watching it, I remember I was watching it at home as a kid, you're seeing this and you're saying, wait a second, Hogan and Warrior, it's 9:30. Pay-per-view started at 7. Wait, Goldberg DDP didn't happen yet. It was just a world title match. What is going on with this? Is Hogan and Warrior going to be the main event? So you're kind of in your head thinking that it is the main event, that they are going on last. So, Kevin, when I was at home watching this, I was like, I guess Hogan, um, Hogan and Warrior is the true main event of the show. I guess DDP and Goldberg isn't going to happen because my feed cuts off. So once 10 o'clock hits and that match ends and whatever, I don't see the main event. I miss it when I'm at home.
Yeah, and that caused repercussions, John, that I don't want to even get into. I mean, do you know what the satellite people, how pissed off they were? You know what I mean? The
Yep.
only thing that maybe saved termination, who knows? I'm just surmising this, okay? It wasn't Hogan and Warrior. I'm not saying this was right, but uh, Hogan and Warrior was the match people have been waiting for years, right?
Yep. The rematch. Yep.
And let's put Goldberg and Page, and that ends the show, and they don't see the Warrior and Hogan.
Yep.
Boy, you would have, you know. I don't know because, again, I'm just would be thinking, but if I was a satellite company and I didn't get to see Hogan and Warrior, I think shit would have hit the fan. Shit hit
That
the
is
fan. Go ahead, what?
right. Like, is that like the saving grace? Well, at least they see the big match everybody wanted to see.
I'm not going to say it's a saving grace, but at least it gives you some kind of legs to stand on. This is no disrespect to Bill Goldberg or Diamond Dallas Page because they had a hell of a match. Hell of a match. But if you had that one and you didn't get to see Warrior and Hogan, what would you have thought?
I would have been pissed. I would have wanted a refund. I wanted to see that rematch.
Okay, did you want a rematch because you didn't see Goldberg or Page?
I mean, sorry, refund. Yeah, no, nope. Yep.
You did?
No. If it was Warrior Hogan, I would have definitely wanted a refund. But no, Goldberg DDP, I was okay with it. That it didn't.
So, again, maybe that's why they went on, and because there was X amount of time left. And that was probably an executive decision
Yep.
over the wrestling people's head. It was probably TNT and the satellite company. And somebody probably made that decision to put that match on because of the limited amount of time. I would think that's what happened. And that maybe superseded even Eric's decision making because I think how would you not give a refund? How could you not give a refund if you didn't see the Warrior and Hogan?
Right.
What was you said?
Yep.
Years in
Yep.
making?
I agree.
God,
Eight
that's a
eight
tough
years. Yep.
8 years. That's a tough call. The
So what
rematch.
happened? So what happened in this rematch though? Because it's Bischoff says it's terrible. Mean Gene always said it was terrible. Hogan says it's terrible. Warrior didn't like how it turned out. What happened with these guys? They had one of the best matches ever in WrestleMania history at WWF WrestleMania 6. Here at Halloween Havoc, it just didn't work out. I mean, the crowd is into it for the most part, but it just doesn't work out. The fireballs a screw up. The finish stinks with Horace Hogan hitting Warrior in the back, and that's what beats Warrior. I mean, just it didn't work.
Let me ask you something. When Hogan and when Hogan put Warrior over, they were both baby faces, right?
Hmm.
Who went over that first match? That
Warrior.
says it. That says it all. You know,
Mm.
guys reluctantly do a job and you lose. You know what I mean? You and I we'll say hypothetically, we're going to wrestle, and they tell me I'm going to lose to you, and I think I deserve to go over. In my head, I can make it look that you look like shit going over. And then once something starts unraveling, John, it's like a thread. Then you hustle and the fire doesn't work. And White Horse was involved. He wasn't. I know that Hulk was trying to do something for his nephew, but that wasn't the right time for Horse to do it to Warrior. I don't know how much longer we're going to see Warrior, John. How much longer?
He's basically gone a few weeks after. Yep.
So now we got a guy collecting a lot of money who's going to disappear in the ether. And maybe he's got a bitch to put out there and blame the other guy. On this one, Hogan was not in the wrong.
Now, as far as Hogan, he gets his win back, from all those years ago. I don't know if that matters to him or doesn't matter, but he got the win back.
Yes. Yeah.
Did it matter to him?
Of course it did. Yeah. Of course it did. Because I'm thinking, I watched the first Hulk Warrior match, thinking, well, what did they do right and what did they do wrong? And it was a great match because the people were really into that match before it happened, right? They built it the right way.
Yep.
The bumping into one another, the whole thing they did right. And the crowd had paid to see that match. It's 8 years later. The Warriors coming wasn't best presentation on his part. And it was nothing like the first match. And it should have been. But on this one, I can't blame Hogan at all.
Interesting little factoid. I don't know if people realize this or not. So August of '98, when Warrior kind of debuts, and I think we'll do a whole separate episode on Warrior. We'll get into it even further down the road. But he debuts and beats Steve Austin in the ratings every time he appears on show. So it's like, okay, maybe he's not the same Warrior, but the fans recognize he's Ultimate Warrior and are wanting to watch him. Maybe not for a long period of time, but for that short stint period of time, he was beating Steve Austin in the ratings when they were building up to Austin and Undertaker, which was like the match for a while for them.
And that's amazing, John. You hit on something we need to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
But when the bell rang, did you think there was something wrong after a minute of the match?
Yes. Something was up. Yeah. Yep.
I felt something was up when they were going to the ring.
Warrior looked injured too. If you watch the match, he's something's off there for sure.
Yeah, and he had said he had hurt his back, so I'm going to take it for his word. And working hurt is a bitch, but it was like. And now that you gave me that information about Austin, thank God we didn't put it on last and not have it. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Because I think it would have had to rebate the whole, what, 500,000 buys or whatever it was. That would have been disastrous for TBS and for the cable systems. Can you imagine that? I would like to know if you could do some research. How many people complained? I'm going to say not many.
I know there was definitely complaints. So it's interesting though that what happens the next night. So and we'll get into that in a second, but the main event is Goldberg defeats Diamond Dallas Page, obviously retains the WCW World Title. One of Goldberg's best matches. A lot of people say it is his best match. I like Fall Brawl 2000 versus Scott Steiner as his best match, but I can easily say this is one of his best matches. Do you think this is one of his best matches? I mean, just an amazing, awesome match. For those who saw it live, awesome match.
With Page, yeah, I
Hmm.
think it was Page led him through it terrifically. The finish was terrific, but I've heard say Page talk about that he should have beat him. Really? A babyface beating another babyface?
Undefeated.
You see, everybody's lining up, you know. They all had their knives out to cut the golden goose's neck.
Yep. WrestleZone just did an interview with DDP, and he said that he requested to Bischoff that he win the match, and he pitched the idea, and I guess Bischoff said no. But it's interesting. So he's still talking about how he probably should have won. I pitched the idea. So I mean, you're saying definitely not Goldberg winning is the right choice.
I think so. How many buys did we have? And it was a double main event,
Yep.
and we were sky high. Kevin had kept the boat going full steam ahead. I don't see. I have a boat, John, and every time I go to get my boat tuned, something's wrong. There's a saying in boating: if it's not broke, don't fix it. This is one of them. And occasionally you have to throw something that surprises the people, but Bill hadn't hit his full potential yet. And this was way too early to beat him, especially with a baby face. He had fought all the NWO and all this, and then he's going to get beat in the middle of the ring by a baby face. Now, I wanted him to lose to Kevin in the middle of the ring. I told you my finish, right?
Yep.
Yeah, Kevin moves out of the way, he hits the post, big boot. Kevin drops something on 1, 2, 3, and they have a return. But that's a heel, not a baby face. So that's, and I'm a heel booker. So maybe I lean that when you got a phenomenal baby face like Goldberg, you don't have another baby face beat him. You know what I mean?
Yep. So the next night on Nitro, we get this match. And it's not the rematch. They're actually just going to show the actual pay-per-view match of Goldberg versus DDP, and it spikes a huge rating. And you hear Vince and the WWE crying about how WCW did it on purpose, and now they're going to show a pay-per-view match on Nitro. Like it's really kind of weird that they bitch about it, but maybe you could kind of see their point in a weird way that oh yeah, then they're going to re-air and they did it on purpose. But what do you think about that? The DDP Goldberg match on Nitro did a huge rating, and obviously Nitro wins the week.
Yeah, it did a huge rating because I think too is people didn't get to see it. Everybody turned in to hate it, and by that time the clatter was around what a great match they had. And hey, WCW and WWE were in a war. It isn't like there's rules in a knife fight. You know, the famous Sundance Kid, Butch Cassidy Sundance Kid. You know, when the guy wants to fight Paul Newman, Paul Newman says, there's got to be rules in a knife fight. He says, rules. And Paul Newman kicks him low. There's no rules.
Yep.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
Yeah.
I think that was a great way to make it up for anybody that did complain, because there was, I guess, some small amount of complaints. But that's a great thing. Hey, we'll give it to you for free on Nitro the next day, so everybody can enjoy what everyone or most of the people missed on pay-per-view.
And it was such a great match. And the atmosphere coming from Vegas, if you're sitting home in Steubenville, Ohio, or Salt Lake City, Utah, you got to see Vegas, and they gave a magnificent performance. And I think it helped both the guys. They got seen by more people,
Yep.
not just a million. And they had what I think was the best match Bill ever had.
Awesome match. Great tease with the diamond cutter that DDP is going to win. So did DDP lay out that entire match? I'm going to guess.
Yes. Page he was sort of like Randy. They would write their whole match out, and it would be pretty close to what they did. But Page did a magnificent job of carrying Bill through that step by step, and Bill did a great job following Page, because that's hard. Trying to remember
Yeah.
shit.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Awesome match. What's kind of your overall thoughts, like as we kind of close out this chapter on Halloween Havoc '98? What's the overall thoughts? Thumbs down, thumbs up, thumbs in the middle. What do you think? Final thoughts on the show.
I think I have to give it a thumbs up because of the screw up. Because it would have been thumbs in the middle. Now, you didn't see what you wanted out of Hogan and Warrior, but if I didn't buy the pay per view and then I turn on the next night on Nitro, right, and I see that match, I'm kicking myself in the ass that I didn't see the whole show, because I think, wow, what a show they must have had. Can you imagine how good the Warrior and Hogan's match was? It sort of saved that match, Hogan and Warrior. Do you know what I mean?
Hmm.
Not seeing something and only hearing about it, people are going to say, well, next time I'm going to buy the pay per view. So I would have said in the middle. And this, you got to remember, this is Kevin being brand new at it, and he did, I thought, a great job. So, and I thought everybody involved worked hard, and there was a lot of guys working hard, which really makes a difference.
Yes, absolutely. I just think with all the hype, I mean, the Goldberg DDP, Steiner versus Steiner, Hart versus Sting, Hall versus Nash, Hogan versus the Ultimate Warrior. It was just so big, you almost couldn't match the hype anyway, because very, very hype show.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm a big boxing fan. How many times have you thought, wow, I'm going to go see something, and uh, it doesn't turn out the way you thought the fight was going to be, like the second uh, Tyson and Wilder fight? You know, it didn't turn out what you thought it was going to be. It didn't live
Yep,
up to the first one. Sometimes you can overhype things, and this was as hyped as you could be. Waiting 8 years for this return, and like you ran down the card, there were main event matches sprinkled out throughout the card. So, yeah, it didn't live up to its hype, but nothing I think does.
absolutely. Now, as far as some plugs for the week, you could follow me on Instagram and Twitter at Two Man Power Trip. You could follow Kevin on Instagram at Taskmaster Talks. Of course, go to ProWrestlingTees.com and type in Kevin Sullivan. Kevin Sullivan has a great store on Pro Wrestling Tees. I highly advise you to check that out. Also, check out Double Hell T-shirts. Yes, Kevin's got a whole array of shirts on there. Again, that is Double Hell T-shirts. Great stuff on there. As far as what else do I have here? Oh, personal appearances. Do you have any personal appearances coming up, Kev?
At the end of the month, I do, John, and I'll talk to you about that, but it's just a virtual thing, so
Okay,
I
cool.
guess still lockdown. Okay.
All right, awesome stuff. And of course, you can go to my website, TMPT Empire, for more on the Two Man Power Trip. Kevin, this has been a blast in the past. I loved WCW in this era. I love Havoc '98. Maybe didn't live up to the hype, but I still love it. And Goldberg versus DDP, with that match and even the huge rating the next night at Nitro, I got to give it a thumbs up for sure. Now, thank you.
Thank you, John.
Yep.
Talk to you
Thank you,
soon.
everybody. Yes. Thank you, everybody, for joining us this week. We will see you right back here next week on Taskmaster Talks with Kevin Sullivan. See you next week, folks.
Thank you for watching the Hannibal TV. Please like this video if you enjoyed it and click the subscribe button to not miss any of our latest shoot interviews, match videos, or news updates. Support us on patreon.com for $1.99 a month to watch our full shoot interviews ad-free and help our channel grow. Follow us on Twitter at the Hannibal TV for instant updates.